You're listening to Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin on Two Broads Talking Politics. Hi everyone, this is Kelly and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm on with my soon-to-be moving and harried co-host, Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hey, everybody.
And we are thrilled today to be joined by Sophie's senator, Senator Tammy Baldwin. Hi, Senator Baldwin.
Hi, it's great to join you.
Yes, super excited to talk to you. Although when I told my sons I was talking to a senator named Tammy, they said, Tammy Duckworth? Because we live in Illinois. So
who'd have thought there'd be two Tammys in the United States Senate? It's not all that common of a name.
So both Sophie and my husband had been hoping for a Tammy presidential ticket. They were sort of arguing over which of you should be president, which should be VP, but Tammy tickets.
We had fun with that. There was even a logo, Tammy 2020.
Yep. I love it. All right. So we are less than a week out now from the most important election ever in the history of all time. So talk to us a little bit about what you are seeing on the ground in Wisconsin, what you're looking for in the next week.
I look at two statistics every day in Wisconsin, like the number of absentee ballots that were requested, the number that were mailed out, the number that have already been returned, how many have voted early vote. And a little later in the day, I go to the COVID-19 webpage and look at how many new positive tests, how many hospitalizations, how many deaths. Oh my goodness. And it's like, those are two things. I go right to the source every day. And, they're not unrelated in many ways, because the horrible news that we're seeing in terms of the surge of the COVID-19 disease in Wisconsin I think, says loudly and clearly we need a change in leadership, and we need to all be a part of changing that leadership by voting. So, to your question, I think as of this morning, we'd reached a number that represents just about 52% of all the people who voted in the 2016 election, but we're still 6 days out. So that's quite remarkable to have that many ballots already in. The pandemic explains part of that. People want to be able to vote in a way that is safe. But I think enthusiasm has to do with the other part of it. And, people understand it is the most important election that they'll ever vote in.
Let's talk a little bit about COVID. Wisconsin is the center of one of the worst outbreaks of COVID right now. We have a hospital set up, a field hospital at the fairgrounds. Our ICUs are fairly overwhelmed. Wisconsin is getting really hit hard by the coronavirus. Can we talk a little bit about what you're hoping to see from a Biden administration in terms of helping the state of Wisconsin get back to normal?
First of all, Joe Biden has a plan, and that plan is guided by science and public health expertise. And Donald Trump has never had a plan. And there's no excuse for that. And then we learn even more throughout the course of this that he was briefed about its severity and decided to downplay it and purposely not share the facts. Meanwhile, again, had no plan and delegated it really to the states and localities to be on the front lines of all of this. So in terms of what I'm looking to see from Joe Biden, it's taking some of those actions that should have been taken on day one and never were. In fact, some of these actions have not to this date been exercised. And I think two of them that I would list right away would be directing the Department of Labor and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to issue emergency pandemic standards so that people have a place to look in terms of what they need to do to keep their employees safe, to keep their customers safe, to keep school children safe in school settings. Instead, I was remembering just a few months back when schools were planning to open, and it seems like almost every school, almost every district was recreating the wheel. And there's certainly some standards for a pandemic that should have been in place as more than guidance, but basically some rules of the road for everyone. The second thing that President Trump should have done on day one is use the full potential of the Defense Production Act. Now that's a law, so it didn't require Congress to pass it. It was already on the books, but it allows you to do some really important things. One is to assess the needs for various things to fight the pandemic, and then compare that to the existing supply. And then if there's a gap, and I can assure you there was a gap with almost everything we're talking about here, to actually put Americans back to work manufacturing those supplies, the protective equipment, the testing supplies and reagents. And that could be done. And then that's not it. The Defense Production Act also allows for the federal government to take over the logistics of getting it to where it's needed. And the president just never did that. And I just talked to, earlier today, an ICU nurse in Antigo, Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin. There's a small critical access hospital, and she's using an N95 mask that is disinfected once a week, I think. And after they do that several times, it doesn't fit as well. The seal isn't quite there. And she was also talking about just how the hospital is overwhelmed, having to send some of the more acute patients a further distance where they have more of that type of care. But she said she still goes out in her community after work to get the groceries, et cetera. And so many people are just totally disregarding the public health advice. And, that to me shows a lack of leadership at all sorts of levels. But I put so much of it back at the feet of this president who encourages this type of behavior and plays into a narrative that it's just not a big deal.
I think Wisconsin is such an interesting state to watch the politics of. We were doing a state-by-state look at politics in 2018, and we started with Wisconsin because it was so fascinating. I was just reading that you and Senator Ron Johnson are the most divergent of any pair of senators from any state. So what is it that Wisconsin voters are looking at when they go to the polls, when they're deciding who to vote for? And, what is it about Joe Biden, Kamala Harris administration that is exciting? We're seeing polls that look really good for Biden Harris in Wisconsin right now. What is driving that in Wisconsin voters?
I looked back at the election of 2016, which I didn't even see coming. In fact, I was confident on election day at 5 p.m. when I did an interview with a news station. I said, well, what if Trump does, win? I was like, that's not going to happen. I shouldn't have been so flip about it. But I was so confident, and obviously it did happen. And it made me take a really deep dive on, what just happened in our state. And, it was for many reasons, but the selfish one was that I knew I was going to be on the ballot in 2018, and so running for re-election. And so it was really important to me to figure out what just happened and what do I need to do and what do we collectively need to do. And so I think there were several things that I discovered in the course of running for re-election. Now, I'm going to be, there's not a word unhumble, but I'm not going to be humble right now. I'm going to say my margin of victory was nearly 11 points. And that doesn't usually happen in Wisconsin at all. And most of our races are very narrowly decided. And so I wanted to be able to share what it is I think we learned. And one of those things was show up. And I know we're in a pandemic, so showing up takes on different meanings now, but show up in places you're not expected to show up and have conversations with people who weren't expecting you to come by and listen and be respectful. You can disagree, but there's a lot of credit you get for just showing up and being respectful and listening, and especially when they're not expecting you, right? And then focus on the issues that are top of mind for the vast majority of your constituents. So, we're a big agricultural state, especially with dairy. We're America's dairy land. We're also a big manufacturing state. We make a lot of things. And so I know that people respect if you become knowledgeable about those sectors of the economy and also recognize the struggles that people are going through in those sectors. And then, even if they were Trump supporters in 2016, if you can recognize what elements were already bad for these sectors, but what was made worse by, say, Trump's tax policy or Trump's trade wars. And, the list goes on in terms of things that were harming farmers and were harming manufacturing. And then talk about those issues, craft plans, and keep on interacting. Healthcare was also, before the pandemic, a huge issue. And I've always talked about the additional steps we need to take to strengthen our healthcare system. Now, of course, we need to reverse some of the sabotage that this administration has done, as well as strengthen it. But I say all that about 2016 and 2018 because I had a real opportunity to share with Joe Biden and the Biden campaign what I felt were the really successful strategies that we had. And every time he's in Wisconsin, he has visited an aluminum foundry not too long ago to talk about manufacturing and Buy America policies. He's done virtual roundtables on agriculture issues, including dairy. He's really made a point to understand and prioritize the things that are on Wisconsinites' minds. And that sits in stark contrast to our current president, who visits a lot in very unsafe ways, but certainly has no handle on the things that Wisconsinites are concerned with.
Speaking of the things that Wisconsinites are concerned about, one of the things that's really come up since the beginning of the pandemic in Wisconsin, but also across the country, is the issue of childcare and caregiving in general. It's really particularly affected women, with people having to work from home and with schools being out and with, various caregivers being unable to come into the home and help out family caregivers. A lot of people are struggling to, watch their kids and also care for their elderly relatives without giving them COVID and get their work done, etc. So I'm wondering if we can kind of imagine in the world, knock on wood, in which perhaps we win both the presidency and the Senate and the House. What can we do to help people out in this particular way with COVID? Because I think it's something that's being sort of overlooked.
Yeah, well, let's start with childcare and early childhood education because it was already too expensive, I think, for many working families to afford. And uh, yet, obviously, the workforce doesn't work when you can't be sure that your child is being well cared for in a safe, quality setting. The pandemic required many of these places to shut down, right? And then when we deemed certain groups essential workers, there was a struggle even to find out how we were going to care for, doctors' children and nurses' children and firefighters' children, et cetera. And there wasn't the equivalent recognition that childcare is an essential, an essential business. And then when one had to think about reopening with smaller numbers of children, that's great in terms of child to professional ratio, but it doesn't make it any cheaper. And so, we're not going to overcome this until, number one, we have a strategy to get beyond the pandemic. But number two, we can't reopen the economy successfully without getting those small businesses and sometimes larger businesses that provide childcare and early childhood education up and running again. And as essential workers, I also think they deserve much better pay than we have traditionally provided to childcare workers. A number of my colleagues and I have, in preparation for what we hoped would be passage of another coronavirus relief bill, put together a nationwide childcare policy. And the real view is that it would probably cost about $50 billion to do it and to do it right, including helping with tuition so that working parents wouldn't have to pay more than 7% of their income towards childcare, early childhood education. I will say that is something that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have really embraced. And this 7% figure is something that they are absolutely going to follow through on. So that to me is exciting. Now, part of those, we also have to deal with, early childhood education all the way through lifelong learning when we look at how some of our educational institutions have been affected by the pandemic. But I thought it was good to take a deep dive on just one part of that rather than throwing out a figure for the whole thing, because again, it's so key to getting our economy restarted after we've made progress on turning. Well, I'm not going to use the president's words, but when we'll bring an end to this pandemic. The other thing I would mention, and this is one that I can talk about from deep personal experience, is family caregiving. So I was raised by my maternal grandparents and ended up being the primary caregiver for my grandmother as she got older and more frail and needed help. And then not so many years ago, in turn, provided caregiving for my mother. And, a little different shape and form, just in terms of what I needed to do versus what other supports could be provided. But women tend to do those things, not only disproportionately care for children, but also tend to be the ones disproportionately who care for our elders in their times of need. And most family caregiving is totally uncompensated and often not even supported in other ways. Dealing with a spouse who has Alzheimer's, Well, there's probably some online help. There is, in fact, I know there is, and there is some community help, but frankly, it's such an all-consuming job for many that they're not going to necessarily get the help and support they need. So I think we have to do a lot of changes in policy related to family caregiving. And I've been able to advance some legislation that would help hasten the policy suggestions so we can get to next steps.
So we could probably talk for hours about all of the things that Democrats can fix when we get both houses and the White House. But let's focus in on the next 6 days. What should our listeners be doing? What is the most effective way to help get out the vote in this very little stretch of time we have left?
Yes. Well, first of all, be a role model and make sure that you've voted already, or that you've figured out the system and have a very clear plan to vote, because it's hard to counsel others to do so if you haven't taken that lead. I think also, especially those who are particularly vulnerable health-wise, that there's no question that people should try to vote as safely and as early as possible. Because of some slowdowns with our mail delivery, they're advising right now that even if you have an absentee ballot in hand already, that likely rather than mailing it in, it's advisable to find one of the designated official ballot drop boxes and drop your ballot there once you've filled it out, conforming with whatever your state's rules are. And then obviously early voting is still an option. There have been some locations with long lines, depending on how many locations there are in a given community. But I've also seen that's it's not the same sort of lines we might see on Election Day itself. So it's still possible to distance more. So I can only speak to like the Wisconsin laws. But I will say that we had a setback from the U.S. Supreme Court in the past few days. Last April, during the pandemic, we were able to accept and count ballots that came in after Election Day for a period of time, so long as they were postmarked clearly as having been mailed by this was April 7th in the case that I'm talking about. But the Supreme Court said that they're not going to let that happen this year, or this November 3rd. And so it's just another reminder that the ballot has to be in by 8 p.m. on November 3rd if it's going to be counted. And in terms of incenting others, make a play date of it. It's a chance to take a walk. It's there's all sorts of things to, make this an occasion. And you'll probably get one of those stickers that says "I voted," so you can herald that. And then, if there's folks that are further away, just obviously talking about many of the same topics that we've discussed in the past few minutes. Those are consequential to everyone. And the last thing, and I'm a little bit ginger about saying this, but, after we've worked so hard and so long to get people involved in this election, everyone gets to take a deep breath, maybe a couple days, but to really, and then again, assuming we have the outcome we're all dreaming about, changing the course of this country after so much division is going to take all of us also. And so stay involved. Your voice and your vote are extremely valuable, but so is your voice around where we go next. And so just stay involved.
I love that. Thank you. And Sophie's already ready for our 2022 episode that we'll do in a couple of weeks.
Yep, I'm already planning.
We've moved past
so
this election.
That's great.
So excellent. Thank you. And if anyone wants to help the Wisconsin Democratic Party call voters to remind them to take ballots to drop boxes, I heard that they are giving away access to their Rocky Horror Picture Show musical event on Saturday night if you do a phone banking shift. So go sign up.
That is so great. They've been very creative with their bringing the casts back together, and it's a great way to get people helping from all over the country who want to get a piece of those events. So whether it's volunteering or otherwise helping our efforts in Wisconsin, we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really fun. I still wish we'd had a Tammy ticket, but Biden-Harris is really, really good too. So.
It's fabulous. It's fabulous.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.